Мне не идет звук в уши. Хорошо. So it's the time for us to consider a number of topics today and to look at the way of cooperation between the Eurasian Committee and the Chinese Initiative. Now, the Konstantin Babkin, co-chairman of the Moscow Economic Forum, will address us now. Once again, I am happy to welcome you all. Thank you for being with us and participating in it. It is one of the very interesting items of the forum that we're going to start now. We'll discuss now the Russian-Chinese relations, which have a long history, and they will definitely be continuing in the times to come. And I understand that our Chinese comrades who listened to the plenary session where I was the moderator, understand that for modern China it's difficult to cooperate with Russia. We say that Russia does not have a strategy. Some people say so. There are no indie plans, and it may be really true that our economy is developing without strict plans, and Russia is lagging behind in terms of the growth rates, not only from China but from many other countries. And it's not easy to understand for the Chinese how to structure their relations with Russia. I understand it very well. Recently I've been to China and I saw how fast China was developing presently, how much investments are made in various fields of activities, and this is done in a planned manner. China has a strategy, scientifically based, discussed from a variety of angles, approved by the Congress of the Communist Party of China, and China shows to the world, surprises the world with the long and uninterrupted period of high economic growth. And if I were in the shoe of Mr. Valveng and John Rosa, who represent now China, and seeing one Chen is joining us, I understand, I place myself in their shoes, and I understand that at one point Russia, until recently, used to be the greatest Soviet Union. China and the Soviet Union borrowed from the Soviet Union many technologies. I visited one of the largest machine building corporation of China in the museum of the company. I saw, as one of the first steps of the formation of that company, I saw drawings developed by Russian engineers in the Russian language, those drawings of the equipment which were used to build various types of equipment like compressors. There are many technologies that China borrowed from the Soviet Union. There were times when our countries cooperated technologically. There were times when China would borrow knowledge from the Soviet Union. Now we want to borrow knowledge and experience from China. We say that it is necessary to plan our development, that we need a strategy. It should be discussed and adopted and move our society forward. We also want to develop, we say in our country, all prerequisites for a long-time successful development. And right now, today, we are going to discuss international issues. China is not only itself developing gradually, but China is building up international relations on a reasonable basis. It has proposed to the world a very nice project, One Belt, One Way. That means that we, inhabitants of Russia, understood what Chinese leadership wants to achieve, what rules of the game are proposed by the Chinese, and Russia does not have a clear strategy. But here in this forum we have given such people who represent this strategy, who believe that there is great potential in Russia, and have a vision, a future vision of our country in the future. And so we are going to discuss the interaction between the modern Russia and China, or perhaps the Russia of tomorrow and China, which would be developing, and China, which is likely definitely to continue to develop in the future. That is a great discussion, a very engaging discussion. We look for cooperation for a long time, which would be measured in terms of scores of years, maybe hundreds of years. we should structure our relations in such a way so the next generation of our people would come and would continue this policy to build the relations between China and Russia on a mutually beneficial basis, as is what we're trying to do now. Thank you for being with us. I wish to all of you a fruitful discussion. And now Sergei Glazyev will address us, academician of the Academy of Academy of Sciences. Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to welcome you on this session, which is titled Issues of Interaction between Eurasian Integration and the Chinese Project One Way, One Belt, and to wish you success from behalf of the head of our state in discussing this issue. And we, as the bureaucrats responsible for finding the way of making these two, projects work together. We work from you. We wait from you, member scientific and academic communities, new ideas as to how we should move forward. So, Mr. Babkin already outlined the way that China is developing, and now we see that there was prerequisites for what we know as Chinese miracle, and elements of this Chinese miracle we see in Korea, in India, and such institutes of the new economy are not foreign to us. This is a long-term planning, identification of priorities based on the laws of the global economic development. We, in all times, would develop some ideas, but then we renounce those instruments for the last 30 years. We went down into the situation of chaos. There is a way out from this chaos, and this project, Big Asia, which our president speaks quite often, and it's initiative together with the chairman Xi Jinping of integrating the Eurasian project and the Chinese project One Way, One Belt may become a broad foundation of a wide-scale cooperation through which a new trade and economic architecture of cooperation may be formed. Within the limits of liberal globalization have already been reached, and we see that the American model and the European model are idling. They are not producing results, and the effectiveness of the policy of softening, which is accompanied by huge emission of foreign Western currencies, and this money, printed money, go into the financial bubbles. And at that time, China monetizing its economy, scoring successes in managing cash flows based on pursuing the goal of building up investments in promising areas of investment, of areas of economic growth, and we as the nearest neighbor, as a strong partner, could borrow such instruments which combine strategic planning and market self-organization, state long-term loans with the private enterprise, and to form joint investment projects, which should be the backbone of this idea of conjunction between two projects, as opposed to the Washington policy, where the financial organizations would want to disassemble the mechanisms of the state sovereignty and state regulation to enable opening of markets of all nations for free flow of international, rather, let us say, American capital. The situation is changing, and this model is being replaced for another model where the key idea of cooperation is not liberalization at all costs, but and not opening of markets, proceeding from the dogmatic presentations of the adepts of the Washington consensus, but joint investments into implementation of prospective promising investment projects. And integration around investments is basically the key idea of the conjunction between the two approaches. What obstacles do we see on our way? Well, I think we have currency, which is uses as an intermediary, is a hindrance for us. We trade through the American dollar. Now we see it as a hindrance between the way of cooperation between Russia and China. You know that Washington is waging against Russia is a hybrid war, and the key front is through financial sphere, and any financial embargo, any bank which would cooperate with companies operating in which are under sanction with Japanese or American would be penalized. So the first priority we should do is to get rid of these intermediary currencies. We should integrate the financial market in such a way so that our companies can borrow from the Chinese financial market, and Chinese companies can come to Russia with their investments and loans. This is the first issue which we are addressing now. This is the formation of not yet common, but harmoniously coinciding financial markets of Russia and China. As you know, we have rather strong differences in currency regulations. Now in Russia there is a full liberalization as per the appropriate. We do not have any hindrance on the free flow of currency. But in China, they still continue to exercise government control on the currency flow, and for China regulators, it's not irrelevant where Chinese money crossing the border of the country go. That's why we need to harmonize systems of currency regulations and control. This is the first issue which I would like to invite your attention to. And the second issue, it deals with the integration of infrastructures. And first and foremost, I would like to invite your attention to payment structures. The Bank of Russia are now working to develop a payment system. The contour, the abyss of this system is now seen. Its modernization is based on the modern information technologies. But in this work, it's important for us to provide for external connection to our payment system of partners from other countries. The Chinese payment system, though it works within an environment of currency controls, does allow for integration of banks from other countries. So the transfer to payment in national currencies, integration of banking payments are basically two sides of the same coin. We cannot address one issue without addressing the other. We should address them simultaneously. And finally, the third issue, which I would like to speak about now, is building up the institutes of development. Russia is a part of Asian Bank of Infrastructure and Investments, which created as the initiative of China. In China, there exists a number of institutes of development relative to the Silk Way, largest state banks, which provide for financing of long-term investments. For us to do the conjunction of the Eurasian integration now in the One Way, One Belt project, we need to make room for these structures to unfold across the great geographical space. And perhaps I should also mention legal issues, setting up preferential terms of trade for businessmen of both countries. We signed today on the way to this goal with China on behalf of the Eurasian countries, an agreement, a trade economic agreement, where we intend to do away with barriers on the way of trade and joint statements. Formation of such convenient and transparent legal, platform environment is yet another important area where we should work for the conjunction of the two projects. At the conclusion, I would like to mention that we have a fundamental issue of building up relationship of trust between the business communities, and we lack today expert assistance, or perhaps assistance to services in terms of legal consulting or application of laws. Many Russian companies complain that they cannot figure out how Chinese economy is made, how it operates, how to penetrate the Chinese market. The Chinese partners, on the other hand, do experience issues in developing confidential or relationship of trust with Russian partners. Without trust, there cannot be any long-term investments. So establishing relationship of trust between business communities of our countries is yet another subject matter, is another objective. We can rely on a long history of cooperation between the Russian Academy of Sciences and Chinese Academy of Sciences. We have built up long-term partnership relationship with between our academies. We fully understand the tasks and objectives in the area of research. But what scientists can do easily, businessmen who risk, they place their money on risk, is more difficult to make. So I shared with you my ideas, and I thank you for your patient hearing. Sergei Yuryevich is the largest domestic specialist in Eurasian integration. He is the founding father of Eurasian Economic Union. What he has told us were covered in the letter a number of new issues which should be remembered and we should implement. Colleagues, we see Dmitry Mezentsev, who stays somewhere in the background. I request you to kindly take a seat in the panel, and we are seeking for your blessing, Dmitry Mezentsev, extraordinary plenipotentiary ambassador of Russia, chairman of the Committee for Economic Policy of the Council of Federation of the Russian Parliament, and chairman of the Society of Russian-Chinese Friendship. You have the floor. We should welcome the audience before I hit the podium, so I try to follow the Chinese customs. Thank you, members, dear participants of the conference, dear members of the panel. The subject matter which were included into our agenda are very topical in terms of the interaction of Eurasian Economic Union and Project One Way, One Belt, and are very topical too in the view of those developments which have been happening recently and which we have been witnessing in the system of relationship between the largest economies of the world, between the economies of the United States and China, the Chinese People's Republic, and we should also think about the consequences which should we take into account here in this audience and in terms of those plans which Mr. Glaziev referred to earlier. Indeed, I have never heard before that you are the founding father of Eurasian Economic Union, but perhaps it has more than one founding father, but without a strong position taken by heads of states who established this integration union, emphasize the word integration. It would not be possible for this integration union to be so effective and successful. I also understand that without the approaches which are offered by leader economists of our nations, and the one which academic Glaziev, of course, takes a place of his own, the issues which were calling for attention and solution would be greater in number. Since I was requested to welcome you, I would like to share with you some of my thoughts. Let us get back in time to Moscow on May the 8th of 2015, when the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and the head of the Chinese People's Republic, Xi Jinping, signed the first founding for the relationship with China and Russia and the agreement on bringing together Eurasian project and the economic policy Silk Way, which was the name of that project at that point in time. That was a very miraculous, a very interesting step forward, which laid foundation of what happened last October when the Minister of Trade of Commerce of China and Veronika Nikishina, Minister of Trade for Eurasian Commission, signed a joint declaration about completion of the trade agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and China. And I would also like to invite you to once again to feel the atmosphere of the high-level forum which were held in Beijing in May under the chairmanship of Mr. Xi Jinping, where the head of the Russian state was the guest of honor. And there were 28 presidents and prime ministers from many countries attending this forum to discuss possible format of joining the program One Way, One Belt.
And Chinese leaders invited to this conference the representatives, not only European and Asian countries, but also a vast number from representatives of African continent. That is the indicator that the Chinese People's Republic, having offered the program One Belt, One Way, offered also a maritime component, exceeds the framework of the medieval conception of the Silk Way. It means that it is a more gigantic philosophy, and it intends to cooperate with the dozens of countries of Europe and a number of countries of African continent. And Prime Minister of Chile also reported to the audience how they are planning to develop the Silk Way concept. If we analyze the ancient books, the camels with silk packages never visited Chile. And today, to a very large extent, this project, and I would surprise many specialists on China, those people who are studying Chinese experience in our relations, and the invitation to build the community of general destiny, which was spoken on behalf of the first leaders and highest leaders of Chinese Republic, One Belt, One Way, and China, understanding its power and capacity and the capabilities of the second economy of the world, moved forward this concept. And I remember myself working in China, and the countries of Shos, they were looking for an answer, which was actually initiated by Nazarbayev, of how to respond to the concept of One Belt, One Way. And actually, the position of the many countries of Shanghai cooperation, this is the invitation to joint work, which is comparable with the capabilities of national economies and national strategies in the framework of those steps, which the countries are capable to make, who were invited, and primarily the countries of Eurasian continent. And that was a well-weighted response. And we are very carefully evading the issues of competition, of economies, of business communities and business structures. We evade the issues of competence. This is so scalable project, so vast. We can't say and deny the possibility of competition, and most of the participants between URSS and People's China's Republic, they would avoid this unnecessary competition. And what we see today, and which we can't forget, these are not so-called trade wars. We are talking about the exchange of steps. in the framework of those limitation efforts which are used by the United States and the Chinese People's Republic, the position of the United States and the economy of Russia, how these economies respond to what the American leader proposed by the decision to defend the national interests of the United States. And the attention to this topic, which is in the headline of the conference, and those experts who are not present here, this is the indicator that we are witnessing a very interesting process of successes of Chinese People's Republic on many and most various directions. We are taking in the inventory and are offering our own experience, and we believe it's very right, it's very correct. And one of the initiatives and the Society of Chinese-Russian Friendship offered last autumn in the framework of those celebrations, which were staged in line with the celebration of the 60th anniversary of Russian-Chinese friendship. And there, on the chair of the society, Mr. Jin Tuan, and we called it first and second. This is Russian-Chinese Financial Forum, and many colleagues asked us why the Society of Friendship offers such a business platform for the discussion, and why they simply don't concentrate on culture and education and brother cities' affairs. Why would they come to that kind of a ground? And we say that the time is different, and the priorities in humanitarian and cultural area, they see it as the opportunity to support business communities, financial and banking structures. And Mr. Glaziev, as a member of these discussions, both open and closed, also supported this idea to create the working group, which is preparing a conference which will be staged in China in autumn of this year, where we are going to have a very open discussion concerning the relationships of the commercial institutions, state institutions, financial institutions, and we can't ignore that. We cannot talk about integration without this, including the concept of one belt, one way, and the new head of the Eurasian Bank of Reconstruction and Development. He is not present today with us. He would tell us more what is available in the portfolio of the bank, where the headquarters in Kazakhstan would also support those plans you've been talking about. And I'm thankful for you for the right to welcome all participants of the conference and wish you all possible success. Thank you. Thank you, Dmitry Fedorovich, and all supporters of Eurasian integration and development of Chinese and Russian relationships. They're all very lucky that our bodies of power and the Council of Federation, Mr. Mezentsev is in charge, and he is taking care of the Russian and Chinese business here. Wasn't only the Secretary General of the Shanghai Organization of Cooperation, he also was the originator of the Business Council of the this organization, and he knows what he says, and with his participation, some new ways will be open for our entrepreneurs and our industrialists in this respect. And on behalf of the industrialists and the president of international entrepreneurs and industrialists, Mr. Glukhich, he is the chair. He has great respect among the Russian business circles and Chinese business circles. Thank you very much, Yuri Vladimirovich. And today and Konstantin Anatolovich and Sergei Yurevich and Dmitry Fedorovich asked very interesting questions and also showed the direction to continue this conversation. The road where and with whom. And first of all, colleagues, I would like, on behalf of the International Congress of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, which combines 29 unions of different countries and great number of colleagues of China, to congratulate organizers and primarily Konstantin Anatolovich, who is the co-chair of Moscow Economic Forum, and for staging this gigantic scope of work. And we saw that all premises of this academy are occupied and busy, and a lot of social and financial issues are being discussed, which are of great interest. And Sergei Yurevich also mentioned those topics related with our bank activity, financial activity, legal issues, and we understand that the interaction of even two companies is a fairly difficult matter, although they are neighbors, and to interact legally and financially and business-wise. And it is even more difficult to interact with countries like China, and which is on the rise now. And when I worked in 1974 at the factory, I studied China to deal with the products produced even at the time of Hunwei beans. We continued our work, and that time the energy sector was developing, and it was a very hard work. And every year I visited China, and I saw from year to year how China was rising, and also we also saw the period of changes took place in Russia, and there was no rise. We dropped down, and it looks only now we see the future. Yes, we do have the drivers and locomotives of industry. Not so good things are, but at least we understand what we need to do, and we don't want capitalism or communism. We want to construct a socially oriented state, which is a clear-cut mission, and this is number one topic. And today we see among all the guests and visitors, the colleagues, we see practitioners and theoreticians and experts, and it is very important for us. It's not the last time to initiate brainstorms. We have many issues, although many of them still remain unsolved. And before the autumn conference, which is going to be held in China, we need to develop the topics which would be of interest and which would be important. And we need to give our entrepreneurs that fishing rod and a tool, and to continue to work and to advise them how to work properly. And expert community should take the role of a leader, and language-wise and legal-wise, and of course in social issues, having come to China for the first time, to understand the atmosphere in which Chinese entrepreneurs are working. Fairly, it's a very complex task without the knowledge of a language and without having working experience with China, just difficult to understand what kind of missions Chinese would choose. You have to always take interest and understand the interest of a partner. Otherwise, you won't make a deal. This is the major task. And Yuri Vladimirovich, from time to time, gives me the opportunity to read his articles and books, and I read them with great interest. Although I know many Chinese problems, but still I find those things which I never knew before. And for me, it's of great interest to understand him as a professional and to understand that we miss something as entrepreneurs. I'm very happy to see so many people in this audience and so many colleagues, and I hope, thanks to the organizers, that after such kind of a meeting, we will see and have new acquaintances and new opportunities to create something to move forward. Thank you. Thank you, Viktor Konstantinovich. The floor of a veteran and a practitioner means a lot for all of us, and we will continue to work together to the benefit of our Eurasian integration. And I have on my list of welcoming speeches, we have Mr. Timirgaliyev. Is he still with us? Well, all speakers are somehow finding the place at the back, and Ruslan is the manager of the Russian-Chinese Fund of Regional Development. It's a new and very important structure on the way of our joint interaction. Esteemed Presidium, distinguished participants, understanding the timing, and I would like to brief you on the work of the Russian-Chinese Fund, and I am in charge of this company in Moscow, and to explain briefly the problems which Chinese investors are facing on the Russian market. And primarily the idea of creation of the Fund of Regional Development was primarily spoken out in the presence of Mr. Glaziev with the economic advisor of Mr. Luche, advisor to Xi Jinping. And at that time, he headed the financial and economic chamber of the Communist Party. And today he's vice premier, and he's in charge of the initiative One Belt, One Way. Then, followed by the May Forum in the stage in Beijing, it was dedicated to the perspectives of discussion of One Belt, One Way, one such fund, what considered to be the tool of the Institute of Development. And last year, the managing company was founded, and in July, during the visit of the chairman of China, of Mr. Xi Jinping, and the key thing is cooperation in the framework to develop in nuclear projects in nuclear energy. And on the 12th of March, we signed the first investment agreement and coordinated the investment of CNC into the joint project with Rosatom. We're talking about the first investments, 2.5 billion rubles, and followed by 16 billion rubles. We are talking about uranium OPEC, understanding that Russia has the scale and resources which makes it possible for us to dominate on the market of uranium on the international market. The second direction is the investment into the agrarian and sector and agriculture, and there was a special visit of Kovkar head, and we met Minister Tkachov, and Kovkar is entering Russia with 3 huge projects, and our colleagues from China, they thought there might be trade wars between China and United States, and out of the 126 products which were published by the ministry in China, these are foodstuffs, and these are the additional taxes on import on United States products. And for Russia, this is a great chance, and actually Russia grows 4.5% every year, and we can multiply and augment our agricultural products, and Russia may become the major supplier of foodstuffs to the Russian market. Of course, other initiatives are being chosen as well, but it is premature to mention them at this time. I would like to mention something about the problems we confront. It's very difficult to work with Chinese yuan to Russia. Currency control and deficit and swaps on the Russian market causes the situation that the first tranches were made in different currencies, and the Hong Kong banks were used, and representatives of the banks, Chinese banks, which are working, they are very careful because of the sanctions imposed by the United States. And today we understand there might be necessity of special type of regulations, and the Russian side, Mr. Glaziev in charge of this commission, and we hope that shortly we'll sign respective decisions which will withdraw these problems. Second problem, the Chinese investors, in all investment agreements, they would like to refer to the law of third parties, third countries, and Hong Kong, where the British law is in place, and the last tendency is signing the deal and support of the deal by intergovernmental agreements, which makes it possible to regulate these investment contracts between the countries.
And the third issue, which I would like to discuss now, is a mental issue. You know that the dynamics of business activities of Russia, the first meetings were much higher than that of the Chinese, because the Chinese call the system of relationship Guanxi take time before they take a decision to invest. On the Russian side, our businessmen and the partners of China require something quick actions and quick agreements. And I think it is here that we have to take into account the vast experience of relation between the two countries to train our businessmen and Chinese perhaps businessmen in technique of striking bilateral deals. Let me wish you success. I would like to leave with the volume of Chinese investments in Russia and Russian investments to China will continue to grow at high pace. It's very pleasant that the idea which was endorsed by our leaders 3 years ago is now being translated into specific deeds, concrete deeds. And I would like to mention that very soon, after May the 8th, 2015, I decided to take a journey across the Silk Way from the shore from Port Lianyungan, where the new Silk Way takes, until the border with Kazakhstan. It was, I took 6 trips, several weeks duration each, using train, car, camel, and the result of this big trip became the book, The New Silk Way, and then it was translated in China into the Chinese language, and they call it Wings of a Big Country, and I think it is quite popular. I'm very happy as an author, of course. And I would also like to add, being a moderator of this session, that the 3 years that have elapsed since then, the integration ideas continue to be developed both in Moscow and in China in Beijing. And in Beijing, in particular, they put forward a forward of creation of a community of the common destiny of humankind. And this concept has already been entered into the Charter, Party Charter, Communist Party of China Charter, and the initiatives of One Way, One Belt is a part of this doctrine as a means of implementing this concept through participation of China in global management. In Moscow, the integration ideas continue to develop as well, and our president stepped up with a proposal to propose the concept of Big Asia, and the development of this idea is going on. And at the same time, certain hurdles are being piled up on both sides. That's why we decided to call our conference Issues of Mating Eurasian Economic Union and the Chinese project, because not everything is happening as good and smoothly as we would want it to see. Very recently, China came across difficulties in organizing large projects within the concept of One Way, One Belt, which pushed China to a more realistic understanding of promoting the ideas. In Thailand, for example, they had to reprofile the passenger railway track into a cargo railway track due to economic insufficiency. In Pakistan, they reject a project about the dam, which is built by Chinese because of difficulties in financing. In Turkmenistan, say they cannot provide enough quantities of gas to China, taken as a pretext necessity to maintain gas pipelines, but they obviously say in this way display their displeasure about the very rigid terms of loan repayments. At the same time, more and more issues pile up about the opportunity to return the investments made. According to the calculations of Bloomberg News, out of 65 countries which are Chinese partner in terms of the One Way, One will think that sovereign debts are to be rubbish, loans, which are not to be returned at all, and would also face issues in the Eurasian Economic Union too. Some our countries, members of Eurasian Economic Union, without waiting for development of the common policy in Kazakhstan in 2015 in November, together with China, Turkey, Azerbaijan, set up a consortium to transport cargoes across the railway track, bypassing Russia using Trans-Caspian route. By the year 2020, they believe to move up to 800,000 containers, which is only somewhat less than the million planned by Russia for transportation. And this route to blackmail Russia want to use not only Tbilisi but Kiev. Some cargo trains were sent from Ilyichovsk to the shore of the Yellow Sea. There are many issues, but definitely we'll be trying to solve those issues. And about one such strategic ways of addressing those issues, we would like to request Mr. Xin Guanchen to speak to us, Director of the Institute of the Border Issues of the Chinese Academy of Public Affairs, one of the leading specialists in China on issues about One Way, One Belt and other integration formations. You have the floor. Colleagues, dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to be a part of this conference. Yuri Vladimirovich mentioned that Moscow Economic Forum is an open forum to discuss serious scientific issues, but I believe that in the new epoch of the Russian economic development calls for new way of thinking and new ideas are required. As a scientist, a scholar, I want to tell you and discuss with you and share with you my personal opinion in order to invite your attention to my thinking. All I think knows that Russia and China have been cooperating very closely in the national scene, and the cooperation in the economic sphere is not up to the level why the trade turnover between the two nations is at comparatively low level. This is a big question mark, an issue which we need to address. So the reforms and opponents in China since the commencement of the policy of openness in China, 40 years have elapsed. So now China is the second economic nation worldwide. Many have received the benefits from the development of China. We should mention neighboring countries which have been dynamically developing through close economic cooperation with China. But Russia has not benefited from the Chinese reforms to the required extent. Why the situation has come to be? We know that the Chinese-American relationship have been developing with difficulties. The Chinese-American economic and political relationship are not successful. How economic cooperation is still high. Looking at the Chinese-Russian relations, we see that our relations are going to the high level and are defined by the sides as a relationship of all-around partnership and strategic interaction between the two nations. A high level of confidence and trust has been reached, but in the economic sphere and the scale of cooperation continues to desire more. They're lagging behind high level of cooperation in the political area. So we should draw a conclusion that the comparatively low level of economic cooperation and comparatively small volume of trade turnover between the two nations is not the consequence of political factors. Why then it is so? I believe that between China and Russia there exists a great difference in concepts and understanding of the issue of development. In China, this number of population is more than 1.5 billion people, which says that which exerts a great pressure on development. If China does not pick up, contain certain growth rate, then in China would face issues in terms of lack of jobs and other issues. So the desire to develop, which is there with the Chinese government people, is very strong. China considers development as the priority of all the work in the nation, and as a law, uncontestable law for the country. As the chairman Xiaoping mentioned, development as a law and rule of the economy. This is so. Russia is a country with wide spaces, rich in resources, and comparatively small population, which leads to a situation when desire for development in Russia is not as strong as in China, in the Chinese society. That is why the two countries have a synchronous regime for economic understanding of economic cooperation. And I can openly say that in scientific and academic sciences, there are different opinions, points of opinion about the reasons for that. So some people believe that China penetrates too deeply into the Russian market and creates certain threats to the Russian economy. There are such points of view. So I would like to say that we should pay attention to this issue, which would definitely be very important for China and Russia in the next 10 years or so. The China's tradition of continuously and developing reforms becoming clear, using the initiative One Way, One Belt. In China, we built an world interaction understanding with the entire world, and Russia is the largest neighbor of China and the most friendly partner, strategic partner for China. That's why China believes strongly that it will continue to get strong cooperations with Russia and will build a community of based on mutual interest with a common destiny. So what I would like to call you upon, I call upon Russian friends to pay attention to this issue of so continue the issue of economic cooperation between China and Russia in this way. And I thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you, Mr. Sinjo. Chinguang. Well, the issues which were mentioned in his presentation are no doubt have been very interestingly presented by Xinguang Chen, and the aspect of regional interaction between Russia and China is one of the ways to intensify our process of mating will be developed in the presentation, but yet another speaker who has come from St. Petersburg. This is a doctor of economic sciences, Chen Jigang. He is the general director of the Chinese-Russian Business Park in St. Petersburg. Mr. Chen Jigang, you have the floor. And he is an executive chairman of the Russian-Chinese Association for Studies and Development of Strategic One Way, One Belt. You have the floor. 7 minutes. Each speaker has 7 minutes. So we're already short on time. Thank you, the organizing committee, to inviting me from a region, from St. Petersburg, myself. Dear Sergei Yuryevich, dear Dmitry Fyodorovich, comrades Tavrovsky, and members of the panel. Only recently, a few months ago, in St. Petersburg, the Chinese-Russian Business Park conducted successfully the third Chinese-Russian Business Forum. That forum, Mr. Tavrisky presented to us. We have the first museum of the Chinese diaspora in Russia, and we have a new idea of Soltsiklo. So we're waiting for your book to be presented to so we are waiting for your new book, Xi Jinping and his 5 years. Since I came from St. Petersburg, in the year 2018, 2019 was identified by the two leaders of our countries as a year of regional cooperations. And I would like, using this opportunity, to say that sharing experience is very important. In St. Petersburg, there is a Chinese business center. On 7th of March 2015, it was established. That was the initiative of the Chinese society, supported by Gazprom, Infoform International, and University of Economic St. Petersburg by Mr. Maximtsev was behind that. For the 3 years, this Chinese business center has been in existence, has become one of the key public platform where various events are held, and a very specific platform for support of Chinese and Russian small and mid-sized enterprises. So that platform was also used by Len Expo, where the Petersburg State Economic Forum was held for 70th years. And they have very strong economic, and we launched the Russian-Chinese business park. In a year from that, we also managed on the 22nd of February 2017, recently, we marked the anniversary of Russian-Chinese Association to study and to develop strategy one-way, one belt. Why? At that point in time, you used the strategy, but then we modified that for initiative. We call it now initiative. At that point in time, we used to refer to as strategy. And indeed, it was an initiative. It is not now no longer owned by China. It has become an idea which is owned by many countries now. Of those countries who desire to develop their economies and promote well-being of their nations, of the population. Over that 2 or 3 years of our existence, we have managed to become a true public platform to supporting this idea.
St. Petersburg is a port city. It's a capital of logistical center, the capital of culture and education. And we understand that that kind of ground was in great need. And we, as a region, this kind of site receives tremendous support on behalf of the General Council and the government of St. Petersburg. We have one interesting project. It's the joyful holiday of spring, and St. Petersburg as a business card in relationship with China. 3 weeks are devoted, and several committees are staging different events with Chinese diaspora and consulate, so that this cultural exchange is taking place, because we believe there is a lack of exchange, and such quality of exchange actually was only in 1950s, and now we see that we have entered a new stage of interaction and communication, and we see this practical interaction, and we understand that 2 leaders are meeting each other at the summit, and we stage many times the so-called year of youth, of culture, of mass media, and now we are entering in the year of interregional cooperation. And through these events, and we deeply feel that our people started to cooperate and communicate very intensively. And not only on top, we see a very heartfelt relations, but we see at the bottom as well. And we spoke with this Northwestern Institute of Management with Mr. Shimanov, and we started to push forward the idea to stage such training sessions on a regional level of medium level of officials and officers, so that they have time to communicate between each other. And we have a lot in common in our history. Even administrative structure looks similar because actually China considered the Soviet Union as the elder brother. But this is not enough. And along with the government program, we need public programs to support this effort, this direction, so that we enter in even vaster communication and to receive support. Thank you for giving me an opportunity. And we invite all those present to St. Petersburg because in 2 weeks we have another event. That's going to be a second Eurasian conference. This is mating of the vast Eurasian space, one belt, one way, and you will see in Presidium, and I'm sure that your presence there will be very valuable. And there is the greatest restaurant, 6,000 square meters. There will be enough space to have Chinese food in this restaurant. Thank you very much. In St. Petersburg, the presence of Chinese, everybody is felt, and perhaps this inter-regional cooperation will become the golden key to the gates. And we believe that our Russian and Chinese communication and interaction on the basis of one belt, one way initiative, and one of such new conditions is the crypto risks. For we are living in the time of digital economies, and Mr. Ershov, the head of financial research, energy, and finance, we will talk about efficiency of our bilateral cooperation under these conditions. Thanks to organizers for such important and vital discussion. And speaking about technical and financial issues, but all those good ideas, far-reaching goals, these ideas, in order to solve them effectively, they should be effectively supported by respective mechanisms and the emerging risks. This is a natural thing, and so that they do not infringe the process. Cryptocurrency, we know, everybody, distinguished colleagues, that this topic takes more and more attention. However, the problem has not only technological but also strategic aspect. For we know that cryptocurrency, this is a highly concentrated market. From the viewpoint of participants, about 40%, they are concentrated on a very narrow set of operators, about 1,000 individuals. It means that the market is manageable, volatility 20 or 30% from previous trading. It is a very volatile market, and some provoking things. We do not know the responses to some of the questions. There might be a version, there is a kind of special project of some special institutions bearing some specific missions. If this is so what would be quasi-mythical organization, what kind of their goals? And we can say this is perhaps the global redistribution of assets, perhaps to instigate the global destabilization, and or maybe even prosaic thing, maybe this is excess liquidity which exists in the world, simply absorb it in the crypto elements, and after that it will be vaporized. There might be another issue, although there is anonymity and liberalism of the system, but we know that the system manages to install a very strict control on all participants. And That is also a point. And one more information. We don't know all answers, but we need to at least point out those matters. Another matters of application which you can touch. You can see that crypto operations from traditional competence of central banks, they carry out a fairly large number of operations. Previously, that was controlled by the central bank, and this is the reduction of the policy in the field of credits and the matters of sovereignty, some kind of operators of this market, and nobody knows what are the goals of these operators. And another technical issue, the growth of digitalization expands the opportunity to extrapolate outside strokes on national economy. Digitalizations, it is a new stage of the openness of the economy, but at a different level of openness. Using different channels, and digitalization also creates risks. We are talking about hot money, and globalization was also related to that, different transactions and digitalization. These are super hot money, super large and super hot in immediate timing. Very small operational expenses. A person may drink a cup of coffee and in a matter of minutes conduct these operations, which also influence and enhances the volatility of the market. So when we are going to build our bilateral or multilateral relationships in Eurasian integration, we have to understand and think very thoroughly how to mitigate those risks, or some kind of echelon access to the system so that we could deal with more predictable situation. And all countries, the topic of inflation is very important. But as crypto tools, this is financial innovation, and financial innovation are also and always related with inflation, because it influences the turnover of the cash flow. And we need to thoroughly understand that with our Eurasian and Chinese colleagues, because if you don't think twice about this, you may lose your economic stability. And in great number of positive sides which crypto elements have, there is a lot amount of risk, and not to make risks prevail, we have to thoroughly study them and neutralize them. Thank you very much. Risks are really available, and we will try to neutralize these things. Our practical cooperation in this field with Chinese side, nobody would tell us better to, as Mr. Li Ziyuan, the plenipotentiary minister of the Chinese People's Republic and the advisor on economic matters. Most experienced professional who knows China and Russia, and he will tell us very interesting ideas of his own. Distinguished participants of the forum, esteemed ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be present at this conference and to speak on behalf of the Embassy of China in Russia. And the topic is the cooperation, One Belt, One Bay, and Eurasian Economic Union after all China Congress of Communist Party of China and two sessions. And lately, very important events took place in China, and they influenced not only China for the dozens of years in future, but also will influence the whole dynamics in the world. And the first idea is the Congress of Communist Party of China, which was staged in 2017, and the largest party elected, Xi Jinping, was elected Secretary General of the Communist Party of China, and the first session of all China of People's Representatives of the 13th call and Chinese Political Consultative Committee, and they also elected new leadership. Xi Jinping was elected chairman of this organization, and at two sessions there were certain amendments made in the Chinese constitution, and the state bodies were restructured, and this restructuring touches upon very interesting relations and intricate relations between ministries, and they are very deep in its nation. Ladies and gentlemen, many countries in the world, they actively support the idea of one belt, one way, and take part in execution of specific projects. In May of 2017, there was the first international forum on one belt, one way, and more than 270 results were specifically obtained in terms of infrastructure, coordination, simplification of trade procedures, free flow of capital between countries and people. So in the reports of the Congress, the openness of China will not cease to exist. These gates will open more and more, and one belt, one way will be conducted in the principle of joint discussion, joint construction, and joint use, and we will attach great importance to raising money and raising foreign investors. We will fortify cooperation and this potential, and to shape new picture based on overall openness. Ladies and gentlemen, all countries, members of Eurasian of Economic Union, support mating of these organizations with the initiative One Belt, One Way, and they actively cooperate in multiple and multilateral cooperation, and China is the largest commercial partner for Asian community, and more than $100 billion is the turnover, and such economic cooperation between China and Eurasian Union becomes tighter and more closer. And I have the proposal in this respect. The signing and execution of trade and economic cooperation between China and Eurasian Union. Now we are working on the wording of this text, and internal procedures are being settled, and I believe it will happen in the first half of the year. And this is an extremely important event to join One Belt, Way and Eurasian Union efforts, and has tremendous importance. It will contribute to the fact to mitigate non-tariff barriers, simplification of commercial procedures, and creation of favorable conditions and deepening of economic conditions between China and the countries of Eurasian Union. The question of the free trade zone is discussed between these two organizations, And second meeting issue, China hopes to expand the scope of mutual trade and investments between the countries of the Union and speedy mating efforts of economic projects and the initiative of One Belt, One Bay in such spheres as construction, infrastructure, industry, agriculture, trade, and other things. And we know that Eurasian Economic Commission has prepared 118 project list, which is now under coordination. Contribution to the globalization, and China is facing stable rise of the national economy, but we see that commercial protectionism efforts are developing, especially in the United States. And in line with the internal law, the United States imposed specific tariffs on the products imported from China. And actually, this is not in favor of the relations of U.S. and China. And differing from the United States, China is prepared to push forward and take responsibility on the destiny of humanity and to demonstrate its openness at all directions to shape more attractive business environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The ways to make two projects may differ, and now it is time to present his vision of the road, of the way. Victoria Perskaya, Doctor of Economic Affairs, Director of Institute of World Economists of the Financial University. We're short in time. I propose that we stick to 6 minutes. I don't mind. Okay. Dear colleagues, thank you for the chance to address this gathering. I have a presentation, but it cannot come up on the screen. So you cannot open it? I would want to say the following. The issue of mating two projects and the initiative One Way, One Belt is a new vision of the institutional approach to world development. The world community is at the stage of transfer from monopolar system to polypolar system. The Chinese side offers to us a very true and very timely approach of the new institutional development of the world economy, interstate cooperations in implementing a large project. Presently, an agreement was signed between China with 68 countries across the globe, and on the whole, this project comprises, taking into common the influence of USA, Eurasian, and Latin America, so the entire world can be involved into this project. So polarity is coming, and at this moment, the Chinese People's Republic offers a principally new institutionalized approach. In this case, I would like to invite your attention to the fact that China firmly stands on the position to retain national identities of all participating countries and preservation of national interests in the process of implementing this project. Presently, the Chinese People's Republic identifies objectives for the year 2018 and down to 2025. These are reforms from making revenues from to producing goods, bringing dividends. So the issue of coping is delegated to the second plane, which is in line with food and technology. Managing innovations and creating endogenic growth through the growth of the productivity of labor. You will see in my presentation when you read it. I would like to say that the Chancellor speaks about exportability of its goods through commercial loans, and previously that was not the case. Another very important aspect of this new initiative is openness to the open. So that means the bringing the financial openness to the optimum. But presently, the internal debt to the GDP is 265%. In this case, we should pay attention to the fact that the Chinese side will be very carefully watching the issues of financial regulations and will increase the role of the state in this. So we should understand, we should provide for the state cooperation in these matters. But the Chinese People's Republic stands for regulated globalization. This was the first time when the chairman of Xi Jinping said in 2017 at the Davos the National Economic Forum, and the Russian President Putin emphasized that at the forum which took place last year, One Way, One Belt. And the mating of the two projects, creations of new zones, free trade zones, development of investments, simplification of the process of trade, building up border parks is a very true phenomena. But conceptual thrust of this project is stabilization in the east, consolidation in the north, go to the south and move westward. This is a doctrinal approach. But now look at the key priorities of the industrial policy of China. They have been formulated in 2018, and they are in line with those priorities which the countries of Eurasian Economic Union formulate for themselves. And what do we have in terms of the real turnover numbers? So you see some numbers. I think that the diagram will be more graphic, presented in a more graphic with you. Yeah. So look at this pie diagram. The export to China based on the results of the half a year of 2017. What we see is that we are lagging behind in terms of statistical boards are lagging behind. We can only look at the custom statistics. So the lion's share of export to China represents the Russian Federation. And now let us look why we, until now, two large countries use dollars for our trade. Why we have picked dollars as a currency? Why we determined to represent our statistical data in dollars? We complain the import from China. Look at again. It falls on the Russian Federation. That means that the fact the Russian Federation, Eurasian countries, is the engine. Yeah. Is an engine. So under these conditions, we should pay attention to the fact that such issues are very important issues, and that we should develop the basis for exportation. Is the trade war waged? Colleague says, no, it has not yet started. Because what the United States introduced under the WTO is, certain provision that national interest should be taken into account. But China introduces countermeasures which is in the interest of China, national interest or national security. But it's a chance for the Russian Federation and countries of Eurasian Union to replace the trade turnover which was traditional import for China from the USA, from goods from Eurasian Economic Union countries. So the year 2017 saw two new areas of cooperation, which also are in line with the one economic belt concept: ecological safety and preferential agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. Non-preferential agreement which has already been almost signed, does not provide for bringing down customs duties. That's very important. That will not be an influx of goods. But what we propose is a reduction of non-tariff, non-customs barriers, and stepping up opportunities for investments. So, concluding my presentation, I would like to say, yes, from a standpoint of participation of China in the global management, I would like to say that the Chinese society is a monolithic society. Many experts would say that there is a revanche. They want to position themselves in the world arena in a better way. But what is typical, starting from May the 3rd, since Xi Jinping speaking on the occasion of the anniversary, said that the Chinese People's Republic would continue to modernize its society within territorial boundaries of the Chinese people. It does not have any expansionist aspirations to impose its views on others, as the USA would do in a monopolar world, but inherently it oriented to such just world economic order, regulated globalization, and basically the growth of economic might and political and military might of China should be taken into account by all partners, including those members of the Eurasian Economic Union. We should be prepared for those challenges because the national interest will dominate. Thank you for your patient hearing, and thank you, Victoria. A very deep and emotional presentation. The next presentation, our very unusual and unique presentation is John Ross, invited professor of the Institute of Financial Studies of Xinjiang of the Chinese People Financial University. Not only he works as a scientist whose works are read in by Chinese leaders, but he is a known Chinese blogger because he studied articles translated into Chinese, come to the Chinese blogosphere, and up to 1 million readers read his posts. Professor Ross, you have the floor.
Right. Firstly, I want to say the matter that I want to speak on this is because I consider the relations of China and Russia the most important relation in the world. Not the relation of Russia and the United States, not the relation of China and the United States, the relation of Russia and China, because this is the guarantee of the stable and positive development of both countries. And I don't want to make that just a claim here. I came to Russia 26 years ago, in 1992, when I wrote an article called "Why the Economic Reform Will Succeed in Russia, it will succeed in China and fail in Russia." This article was not asked for by peripheral people in Russia. The person who commissioned the article was Arkady Volsky, who was at that time the head of the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs, Industrialist Entrepreneurs, and Ruslan Hasbalatov, who I see as speaking at this conference. I think I was the last foreigner to see him before the suppression of the Russian parliament. So I think this is not a matter that I have not thought about. I want to say very honestly, in 1992, when I came to Russia and wrote an article saying why the reform will succeed in China and not in Russia, most people in Russia told me Russia has nothing to learn from China. That was the honest response. At that time, the size of the Russian economy and the size of the Chinese economy was about the same. Today, and it gives me no pleasure to say it, the Chinese economy is 6 times as big as the Russian economy. It gives me sadness to say this. It turned out that Russia had a great deal to learn from China. And I want to explain why this is the most important relation in the world, because it is the interests of both countries. As I lived in Russia for 8 years, and I've worked in China now and lived in China for 9 years, The national interests of Russia and China are complementary. See this from the point of view of China. What does China want? There are three countries in Asia which are important for China, which is Japan, India, and Russia. What it wants in Russia is a stable Russia to its north. Russia can only be stable if it's strong, and of course friendly to China. That goes without saying. That is, China's national interests are for a stable, strong Russia that is friendly to China. The United States and Western Europe have an interest in a weak Russia. Why? The United States does not want Russia to be part of Europe, by which I mean the European Union type structure. I don't mean necessarily a formal member, but in good relations. Why? Because this makes the European Union as strong as the United States. Therefore, the United States wants bad relations between Europe and Russia. Unfortunately, France and Germany also want a weak Russia, which is not on good relations with the European Union. Why? Because France and Germany together control Europe, the European Union. If Russia is close to the European Union, France and Germany will not control it, because the population of Russia and the scale of Russia is equivalent to France and Germany combined. Therefore, the interest of the United States and the European Union, unfortunately, is that there should be a weak Russia. Therefore, the interests of Russia lie in the situation with the situation of China. Not, of course, from the point of view of China. I don't expect people in Russia to approach it from the point of view of China. I expect them to approach it from the point of view of Russia. But their interest is a stable, which must be a strong Russia, and also in relations with the other states of the former USSR. And that is also the interests of China. So the national interests of China and the national interests of Russia coincide. And that is the fundamental issue, which creates all the things from the One Belt, One Road and so on. And if these are dealt with, it will create the problems. Finally, please understand the way that China operates. I can say this from the outside. China does not make a big noise. It does not want a confrontation with the United States. It is not seeking a confrontation with the United States. It doesn't want a tariff war. It will do many things to stop it. But China also has very firm interests. The Chinese ambassador to the United States said very firmly, he didn't mention Gorbachev, but let me say this. China is not a Gorbachev. If the United States chooses to attack China with tariffs, China will respond not in an exaggerated way, not in an excessive way, not with desire, but with exactly the same proportion which the United States does. And that is a completely responsible attitude. Therefore, that is the final thing I wanted to explain why I consider the relations of Russia and China are the most important relation in the world for both countries.
Thank you very much indeed.
Indeed, Russian-Chinese relationship is the most important in the world. Had it not been for the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership, perhaps a Third World War would have happened. About strategic points of mating Russian and Chinese economy in the conditions of the current trade aggression by Mr. Mityaev, director of the system programming, will tell us. Programming will tell us definitely. Very briefly, I see three challenges and three responses. Three challenges. The financial crisis has already started. The world financial crisis has started. We saw the certain indexes of the time and the depth of this crisis is to be discussed. The crisis I give it 20% probability, as in 2087. Sharp decline without recession in the economy. There may be a collapse, as what happened in our country in 1998. I give to this scenario about 30% probability. It can be a decline by one-third, 30 or 40%. There may be a catastrophe, as something which happened us in 1991 and what happened in the United States in 1925. Our task of Russia, is to take the model of our integration into the world economy, which amplifies those external shocks. We should avoid this, and we should disassemble this module of mating of our economy with world economy until it is too late. Now I say the trade, what I want to say, the trade war has started. The key objective of the trade war is China, and President Trump he prepared to wage on two fronts, with China and with Russia at the same time. And the sixth challenge is a geopolitical tension, including military tension. It will not go down, it will intensify in this connection, and due to these reasons as well. And it is very hardly that it may be focused on Russia only, I think so. There are three responses to those questions. As we mentioned today already, this is the one response is to mating strategies of Russia and China. We see a strategy in China. It was more solidified in the latest party and state documents. Second response is our own system of evaluation, something which Van Ven spoke about. The West undervalues Russia and China. So Anglo-Saxon system of evaluation was developed to underestimate others on a number of parameters in terms of capitalizations and other. That is why the crux of the matter here is that we should not use any third countries in terms of payment. We should denounce SWIFT use the Chinese SWIFTs and our analogous system. Technologically, it is prepared. We should also denounce ratings in China. They adopted national rating agencies. They have 5 national rating agencies. We have 2 national ratings. We should not take into account other ratings like Moody's and others, S&P, Fitch, and so on.
The same as jurisdiction. We can't use foreign jurisdiction. We see those courts and judicial verdicts, Stockholm arbitrage, and this is not only Russia. Kazakhstan was actually arrested $22 billion of national well-being, and this is information war. We can't use Western technologies because the West uses this as an element of domination and competition. And the most important thing is we need to join in the near future. We're not talking about days or weeks. The global system is very big. We are talking about 2 or 3 years. Even if there is a catastrophe, it's not happen immediately. It will go by wave. And the largest market in the world of capital, that is the China. This is more than 200 trillion yuans, RMB, and it is necessary to attract this money into Russian economy because the wear of the major assets is very dramatic and it needs to be replaced. Thank you very much. Now we will continue the topic on strategic situation in the world, and Alexander Nagorny, the executive secretary of the Zborsky Club, will tell us about the general outline of this geostrategical triangle of Russia, China, and United States. And now we have already exceeded all the time of proceedings. and procedures. I will try to be as brief as possible. You know, our conference is called Problems, but we spoke very little about problems. And of course, we have gigantic problems in trade and economic cooperation between Russia and Chinese Republic. And suffice it to say that we are talking about strategic character of our partnership, but practically, even at this conference, nobody spoke about the sources for this strategic partnership, and the sword is the onslaught of the United States of America against Russian Federation, and the same they are doing against China. And even if we analyze how it was characterized at the plenary session, the relationship, no one from the speakers analyzed the aggressive nature of American imperialism, but the movement from there is very strong. And the force of the United States is not measured by financial and economic parameters. I would say that Americans, they're strong enough in a broader spectrum. This is a political, ideological maneuvers in diplomatic sphere, and the work with the political, economic, and financial elites, both in China and in Russia. And we see that there are enemies of our overall cooperation, both in China, who are basically protecting the cooperation with the Western world and United States, and in Russian Federation has a greater scalable character because the financial element of the government consists of the adversaries of cooperation with Chinese Republic. And if we objectively analyze this, other than the supply of hydrocarbons, practically we don't have anything. We don't have any relations in financial and economic sphere. We don't have interaction which we need to create. And the time is not enough. Everybody is talking about the trade wars, but this is not actually trade war. It's hot war, and this is the penetration into political elites both in China and in Russia. This is the attempt to destabilize the situation in third countries and in the Asian area like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenia, which will be the first target for the blow, because they would destroy the energy flows which come from the Middle East to China. And the fact that China has created 3 or 4 lines for gas and oil supply, they could be destroyed easily by choking the pipelines from Turkmenistan. Yes, we speak very little about unpleasant things, about these things, but we need to develop very specific steps to compensate for that by the governments of our countries, and we need to pay attention towards cooperation as it was organized in the years of the Soviet Union in the 50s, when special ministries were organized, which were in charge of specifically economic relations with Chinese Republic, and now the time has come to initiate the same thing. Thank you very much. Mr. Remega, Professor, Doctor of Economic Science. So on the ways of mating, we have discussed the original cooperation, which was a reserve, and there are specific projects, bilateral projects, and they are very promising. esteemed colleagues, to speak in the end of the conference is really difficult, but it's a matter of honor. And I will speak very simply because everybody is tired, but very obvious things. And I heard the presentations in the morning and today, and we saw many bright proposals of theoretical value. But let's think, what would be the marks of success or not? Whether these projects will be executed or not. If no projects emerge, so there will be no meeting. And I wanted to elaborate on these two major issues, what Viktor Konstantinovich spoke. Not actually always we account for the things. There was more than 100 projects, and our question is, have you heard about a single project which was executed? Yes. No movement at all. No movement at all. Here we had heard about Iranian OPEC. Yes, the agreement was signed and the money already there, but whether it is mutually appropriate, and we sometimes discuss infrastructural projects like highway line Moscow and Beijing. This is, of course, fantastic. It's a new quality of growth. But when we discuss this thing with Chinese, they say, so what? So let's start building. Financing will be by China. Cargo will be Chinese goods, and we will supply the rails and the sleepers. What you are going to do? Russia are going to stay away. They are expecting certain proposals. Yes, these projects should be very thoroughly calculated, and I will elaborate on two projects where Russia holds very strong position. We are talking about the following. When we spoke about the cooperation in Arctic, so why in Arctic? Why would we cooperate in Arctic? On the 26th of January, Chinese, they signed their white book on the Arctics, and they said the following: we have three spheres of cooperation in which we would be of interest to find most interesting directions. This is polar regions, internet, and space. Those areas which were not captured yet. As far as Arctic projects are concerned, here the interest is very great. Another project, we started to give this formula again as far as taxes are concerned. So when we analyze separate types of taxes, this is necessary. But for us, it is important the kind of the tax burden, what kind of a tax burden presses the economy. And in Russia, all types of taxes and payments and quasi-taxes, it's 37–40% of the GDP, and this is extremely excessively high. This is at the level of countries of continental Europe, of France, which grow by different speeds. And our studies demonstrate that in order to make this horse run fast and win prices, the tax burden should be lesser, and that should be done because business will have more resources to invest. And we, for Russia, we recommend the tax burden at least 33% of GDP, meaning that this growth and definitely the taxable basis will grow. I will give you China. In China, the tax burden is fairly low. Your pension system is not developed at 26% of GDP, with the accumulation 46% of GDP. And we have absolutely vice versa. We have 40% the tax burden and 21% it's a norm of investment. We have statistics of Rostov.
Okay, so that is why, from the standpoint of taxation, there might be many tools in terms of specific tools and payments. But it is important for us what is the total burden. If Ruslan Semyonovich allows me, no, you won't, Ruslan. I need 2 minutes. 1 minute. 2. 1. Okay. The body of the credit. So the future, we will now learn our future when the government is appointed in May. That is true. All my contacts. Nobody now can tell me what kind of government will be appointed in May. There are 4 possible versions. First version is going to administrative economy, mobilization economy, and increase growth the roles of those. The second scenario is what we have now. Same government, semi-closed stagnation economy, where the role of government will be increased, and where another crisis will come, where industrialists would offer its own mechanism or recipe, personal, how to address this issue. The third scenario, something like a situation in France during the Franco time. Same system, but with huge investments in infrastructural projects, a partial liberalization for business to be able to survive. And the fourth scenario, with minimal chances that it may exist, I try to give in the formula of growth a situation when the money, credit, and interest rates is only a part in the systemic treatment which a doctor appoints. There is infrastructure issues, budget investments, reduction of tax burden, and great tax breaks. This is the systemic treatment which we are looking for when we go to a doctor. We don't want to treat only one sore. No. Okay. I am closing our conference. It has already extended beyond all thinkable time. You see that there are many recipes, and there are a number of good advices. But I would like to say something in this connection. Failures of our reforms stem from our genetic quality of absence of not our inability to come to terms among ourselves. We all want to save Russia, but if you want to save it not in the way I want to save it, then let Russia perish. And this is terrible, this is horrible. Well, each proposal has some positive elements. We are not populists here who can offer simple solutions for a very difficult problem. So we need to listen to each other and to agree on something, and not to strongly believe only in the correctness of your position. I think this is our genetic feature, which is something we should always take into account. But I would like to say that I am happy with our discussion of today. Perhaps there were too many professionals in the among speakers. Perhaps they should be twice as many. I thank you all for your patience, for your courage, and for the attention to what we're doing here. Sometimes it was disorganized, but it was nice and instructive for me. Thank you. We continue our forum.